Lena adjusted the borrowed satin gown, its silky fabric clinging to her curves a way that felt both alluring and uncomfortable. She tugged at the neckline, feeling exposed in a dress that was far more expensive than anything she had ever owned. Her best friend, Jasmine, had insisted she wear it, assuring her that no one would notice she didn't belong at this lavish event. The grand ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers, their golden light reflecting off the glittering champagne glasses held by the elite of New York society. Lena could hardly believe she was here, amidst the city's wealthiest and most powerful people. Yet, as she stood in the corner, clutching her glass like a lifeline, she felt invisible. "Relax, Lena," Jasmine whispered, nudging her with an elbow. "No one's paying attention to us. Just enjoy the free champagne and hors d'oeuvres." Lena managed a weak smile, but her gaze kept drifting to the center of the room where her ex-boyfriend, Daniel, stood with his new fiancée. They looked perfect together. Her in a designer dress that probably cost more than Lena's rent. Him in a tailored suit that hugged his muscular frame. It stung more than she wanted to admit. Daniel had moved on so quickly, barely 3 months after breaking her heart. As if sensing her distress, Jasmine pulled her aside. "Don't let him ruin tonight. This is your chance to have some fun. You deserve it." Lena nodded, swallowing the knot in her throat. She tossed back her champagne, feeling the bubbles rush to her head. "You're right. I won't let him get to me." But even as she spoke, her heart ached. She remembered the promises he had made, the dreams they had built together, and how easily he had replaced her. She turned away, determined not to let him see her pain, and bumped into a hard chest. The scent of expensive cologne filled her senses as strong hands steadied her. "Careful there." A deep voice rumbled, smooth and confident. Lena looked up and her breath caught. Standing before her was Alexander Grayson, the billionaire host of tonight's gala. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his chiseled jaw giving him an air of authority and sophistication. But it was his eyes, piercing gray with flecks of silver, that held her captive. I'm so sorry," Lena stammered, feeling her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I didn't mean to." "No harm done," Alexander interrupted, his lips curving into a half-smile. "Though I must say, it's not often I have a beautiful woman literally falling into my arms." Lena's blush deepened. Was he flirting with her? No, it couldn't be. He was Alexander Grayson, the billionaire playboy who could have any woman he wanted. She was just a nobody in a borrowed dress. She fumbled for words, completely disarmed by his presence. But Alexander was unfazed, his eyes roaming her face as if trying to place her. "I don't think we met before," he said, curiosity coloring his tone. "I would definitely remember someone like you." Lena's heart skipped a beat. She didn't belong here, and the last thing she needed was to be noticed by someone like him. "Oh, I'm just a +1, she lied, her voice wavering. "I'm not really supposed to be here." Alexander raised an eyebrow, amusement dancing in his eyes. "Not supposed to be here? Now you made me curious." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Are you someone's secret date?" No, nothing like that," Lena stammered, her face growing hotter. "I'm just here with a friend. It's her party invite, not mine." "I see," Alexander mused, his gaze lingering on her. "Well, your secret's safe with me." He took a step back, his posture relaxed, but his eyes never leaving her. "Care to join me for a drink?" "I promise, no strings attached." Lena hesitated, her instincts telling her to decline. This was dangerous territory. But then she saw Daniel again, his arm wrapped around his fiancée, his lips pressed against hers in a passionate kiss. A fresh wave of pain washed over Lena, threatening to drown her. She wanted to forget, even if just for tonight. Turning back to Alexander, she forced a smile. "I'd like that," she said, her voice steadier this time. "I'd like that very much." As he led her to the bar, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that this night was about to change her life forever. She just didn't know how much. 3 weeks later, Lena sat alone in her small, cluttered apartment, her hands trembling as she stared at the pregnancy test in front of her. 2 bold pink lines stared back, confirming her worst fear. She was pregnant. Her heart raced, her stomach churned, and her vision blurred as the realization sank in. She was going to have Alexander Grayson's child. Tears threatened to spill over as she buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. She never imagined her life would take such an unexpected turn. One night of weakness, one night of heartbreak and vulnerability, had changed everything. And now, she was left to face the consequences alone. Her mind raced as she thought back to that night, the night she had allowed herself to be swept away by his charm, his touch, his undeniable presence. She had been vulnerable, broken from seeing Daniel, her ex, move on so easily. Alexander had been there, offering comfort and understanding, his eyes filled with genuine concern. He had made her feel wanted, special, even if just for a fleeting moment. But now, she was paying the price. Lena wiped her tears and took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had to be strong. She had no choice. Her parents were gone, and she had no family to turn to. She was alone in this world, just as she had been since she was 18. She had to take responsibility for herself and for the child growing inside her. But she couldn't help the fear that gripped her heart. How would she manage? She could barely make ends meet working 2 part-time jobs as a waitress. How could she possibly provide for a child? Her thoughts turned to Alexander. Should she tell him? Would he even care? He was a billionaire, a man accustomed to wealth and power. He had probably forgotten all about her by now. To him, she was just another woman he had spent a night with, a nobody in his world of luxury and privilege. But the child was his. He had a right to know. And maybe, just maybe, he would help. Not for her, but for his child. Lena's hands tightened into fists. She had to tell him, no matter how scared she was. He deserved to know the truth, and her child deserved a chance at a better life. Summoning every ounce of courage, Lena pulled out her phone and looked up the address of Grayson Enterprises. She would go there in person. She couldn't risk him ignoring her calls or dismissing her as some crazy woman. He needed to see her, to look her in the eyes and hear the truth. The next morning, Lena stood before the gleaming glass skyscraper that housed Grayson Enterprises, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. The building was intimidating, towering above her like a symbol of Alexander's power and influence. She swallowed hard and took a step forward, clutching her purse tightly. She had to do this, no matter how scared she was. Inside, the lobby was grand and luxurious, with marble floors, golden chandeliers, and towering pillars. Lena felt out of place, her modest dress and worn-out shoes starkly contrasting the polished, high-class environment. She approached the front desk, her voice trembling as she asked to see Alexander Grayson. The receptionist's eyes narrowed as she looked Lena up and down, her expression unimpressed. Do you have an appointment? And no, but it's urgent. Please, I just need a few minutes of his time, Lena pleaded, her voice shaking. The receptionist's lips curled into a smirk. Mr. Grayson doesn't see people without appointments, especially not walk-ins. If you don't leave, I'll have security escort you out. Lena's face flushed with humiliation, but before she could respond, a deep, familiar voice echoed behind her. It's okay. I'll take it from here. Lena's heart stopped as she turned around to find herself face to face with Alexander Grayson. He looked even more imposing and handsome than she remembered, his sharp jawline, piercing gray eyes, and perfectly tailored suit radiating power and authority. But his expression was cold, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. What are you doing here? He asked, his voice low and guarded. Lena's throat tightened, and she struggled to find her voice. I need to talk to you. It's important. Alexander's gaze flickered with annoyance, but he nodded curtly. Fine. Follow me. He led her to his private office, a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city. Lena felt even more out of place, standing amidst such wealth and power. But she couldn't back down now. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding as she faced him. I'm pregnant, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander's eyes widened in shock before narrowing in anger. What? It's yours, Lena continued, her voice trembling. From that night, I found out a few days ago, and I thought you should know. For a moment, There was only silence as Alexander stared at her, his face unreadable. Then his expression hardened, his eyes turning cold. You expect me to believe that? You think I haven't heard this scam before? Women trying to trap me with fake pregnancies for my money. Lena's heart sank, her eyes stinging with tears. I'm not lying. I don't want your money. I just thought you should know. This is your child, too. Alexander's jaw clenched, his eyes blazing with fury. Get out. I don't know what game you're playing, but I won't be fooled. Leave before I have you thrown out. Lena's chest tightened as his words cut through her, his coldness piercing her heart. She turned and walked out, her vision blurred with tears. He didn't believe her. He didn't want anything to do with her or their child. She was truly on her own. Lena stared at the mirror in her small bathroom, her eyes swollen and red from a night of endless tears. Dark circles clung beneath her eyes, a stark contrast against her smooth, dark skin. She placed a protective hand over her growing belly, feeling the slightest flutter, a reminder of the life she was determined to protect. She was going to be a mother, alone. Alexander's cold words echoed in her mind, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. You think I'll fall for that? I've seen women try to trap me with lies before. Get out. His face had been etched with disbelief and anger, his gray eyes colder than steel. Lena squeezed her eyes shut, forcing the memory away. She wouldn't cry again. She had done enough of that. Taking a deep breath, she splashed water on her face, the icy droplets jolting her back to reality. She had no time for self-pity. Her child depended on her now, and she would do whatever it took to give them a better life. She straightened her back, forcing herself to stand tall despite the weight of her fears. If Alexander didn't want to be part of this child's life, then so be it. She would do it alone. Leaving the cramped bathroom, Lena made her way to the tiny kitchen where her best friend, Jasmine, was waiting, concern etched into her features. You look like hell, Jasmine said, her voice gentle but honest. Did he believe you? Lena shook her head, forcing a bitter smile. No, he thinks I'm trying to trap him for his money. He didn't even listen. He looked at me like I was nothing. Her voice cracked, and she felt tears threatening again. No, she wouldn't cry. Not in front of Jasmine. Jasmine's eyes darkened with anger. That arrogant bastard. How could he? She took a deep breath, visibly calming herself. You don't need him, Lena. You never did. We'll get through this together. Okay? Lena looked at her friend, gratitude swelling in her heart. Thank you, Jasmine. But I can't depend on you forever. I have to figure this out. For me and for my baby. Her hand moved to her stomach, her eyes softening. Jasmine's face softened too, her gaze falling on Lena's belly. You're stronger than you think. But you're right. You need a plan. What are you going to do? I need to find another job, Lena said firmly. Something that pays more. Maybe I can pick up extra shifts somewhere. I'll make it work. But what about your health? You can't overwork yourself while pregnant. It's dangerous, Jasmine argued, her concern evident. I don't have a choice, Lena replied, her voice steady. I can't afford to take it easy. Rent is due soon, and baby things aren't cheap. I have to do this, Jasmine. I have to. Jasmine sighed, recognizing the determination in Lena's eyes. Fine, but I'm helping you whether you like it or not. Lena smiled, her first genuine smile in days. I don't know what I'd do without you. That evening, Lena went through the classified ads, circling any job that seemed even remotely possible. She didn't care if it was cleaning, waitressing, or stocking shelves. She would take anything. By the next morning, she had lined up 3 interviews. She took the bus downtown, clutching her worn-out handbag tightly as she navigated the bustling streets. Her stomach fluttered with nerves, both from the baby and the anxiety of the unknown. The first interview was for a housekeeping job at a small hotel. Lena stood before the manager, her back straight and her chin held high. She wore her best dress, a simple, fitted African print dress in muted brown and gold patterns that complemented her dark skin. Her hair was pulled back into a neat bun, her face bare of any makeup except for a touch of lip balm. She looked professional, confident, even if she didn't feel that way inside. The manager, a stern woman with thin glasses and a clipboard, looked her up and down. "Have you done housekeeping before?" "No, ma'am," Lena answered honestly. "But I'm a quick learner, and I'm not afraid of hard work." The manager raised an eyebrow, but nodded approvingly. "We need someone reliable. You can't miss a single shift." "Understood?" "Yes, ma'am. I understand." The interview ended quickly, the manager promising to call if she was selected. Lena thanked her and left, her heart pounding with hope. She needed this job. She needed all three, actually, but even one would be a blessing. The second interview was at a small diner, and by the end of it, Lena had secured a part-time position as a waitress. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She would make it work. She had to. By the time she returned home, Lena was exhausted, her feet aching and her back sore. But she felt a spark of hope she hadn't felt since finding out she was pregnant. She was going to make it. She was going to survive. As she sank onto her worn-out couch, her hand instinctively moved to her belly. "I promise you," she whispered, her voice soft but fierce, "I'll give you a good life, no matter what it takes." In that moment, Lena realized that she wasn't alone. She had a purpose now, a reason to fight, and she would fight with everything she had. The soft chime of elegant music floated through the lavish banquet hall, echoing off golden chandeliers and marble floors. Lena stood at the edge of the room, her heart pounding, her hands nervously smoothing the fabric of her fitted African print dress. The vibrant maroon and gold patterns complemented her dark skin, giving her a regal appearance she didn't feel. She was here to work, not to mingle. Yet, she felt like an intruder in a world that wasn't hers. She took a deep breath and adjusted her serving tray, carefully balancing the crystal glasses as she moved through the crowd of elites. Laughter and polite conversation surrounded her, but her mind was elsewhere, her thoughts circling around her growing belly. 4 months pregnant and showing, she wore a scarf around her waist, tying it just above her hips to disguise the gentle swell. She needed this job, even if it meant hiding the truth. Her stomach fluttered. The baby's soft kicks a reminder of why she was doing this. She had no choice. Alexander's rejection had made that clear. He wanted nothing to do with her or the child, and she was determined to protect her baby from his coldness. "Excuse me, miss." Lena's head snapped up, her eyes locking onto a familiar face. Her heart stopped. Alexander Grayson stood before her, his expression one of polite indifference, his gray eyes as cold and distant as she remembered. Dressed in a tailored black suit with golden embroidery, he looked every bit the powerful billionaire she had fallen for that night. She hadn't expected to see him here. Not tonight. Not ever. Her blood ran cold. Would he recognize her? Did he even remember? Her face turned pale as she quickly lowered her gaze, her hands trembling as she offered him the tray of champagne. Alexander barely looked at her, his fingers brushing hers as he took a glass. "Thank you," he said, his voice smooth, disinterested. A chill ran through Lena as she muttered, "You're welcome," and quickly turned away, her heart racing. She could feel his eyes on her back, but she didn't dare look back. She focused on her breathing, forcing herself to remain calm, to stay professional. She needed this job, and she wouldn't let him ruin it for her. She continued serving drinks, careful to keep her distance, but fate wasn't on her side. Just as she rounded a corner, she stumbled into someone, the glasses on her tray wobbling dangerously. A strong hand shot out, steadying the tray before the crystal could crash to the floor. Lena's heart dropped as she looked up, finding herself face to face with Alexander once again. His eyes narrowed, his gaze intense as he stared at her. Recognition flickered in his expression, his brow furrowing as he studied her face. "You," he said slowly, his voice dropping to a low, cold whisper. "I remember you." Lena's blood turned to ice. She tried to turn away, but his grip on her arm tightened, holding her in place. "No, you don't," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You're mistaken." His eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. "You came to my office. You said you were pregnant, and then you disappeared. Why are you here?" Lena swallowed hard, panic rising as his words pierced through her. He remembered. He remembered everything. Her heart pounded painfully, her mind racing for an excuse, a way out. I I needed a job. That's all. He released her arm, his eyes still locked on her face. I don't believe in coincidences, he said, his voice cold. Why would you come to one of my events? I didn't know it was yours, Lena replied, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. I just needed work. I didn't plan this. His eyes flickered down to her waist, suspicion darkening his gaze. Lena instinctively tightened the scarf around her belly, her breath catching as she realized what he was thinking. Alexander's eyes narrowed further, his posture rigid. Are you? No. Lena lied, her voice sharp. I'm not pregnant. I never was. He took a step back, his face hardening. So it was a lie after all. I knew it. He turned away, his shoulders tense, his voice bitter. I don't know what game you're playing, but I won't fall for it again. Stay away from me. He walked away without another word, his back stiff, his stride cold and calculated. Lena watched him go, her heart shattering all over again. She had lied to protect herself, to protect her child. But the pain of his rejection was no less sharp. Tears threatened to spill over, but she blinked them back, her chest tightening painfully. She couldn't break down here, not in front of these people. She couldn't afford to lose this job. Taking a deep breath, she squared her shoulders, straightened her dress, and continued her work, her hands steady even as her heart ached. She would endure. She would survive. She had no other choice. In the corner of the room, Alexander watched her, his eyes narrowing as he observed her every movement. There was something about the way she carried herself, the way she held her stomach. That didn't sit right with him. She was lying. He was sure of it. But why? And what was she hiding? His jaw tightened as he made his decision. He wasn't going to let this go. Not this time. He would find out the truth, no matter what it took. Alexander couldn't get her out of his head. No matter how hard he tried, Lena's face haunted him. Her eyes, wide and fearful, had stirred something in him, something he wasn't ready to acknowledge. But her denial echoed in his mind. I'm not pregnant. I never was. He didn't believe her. Not for a second. He had seen the way she tightened the scarf around her waist, the way she moved with a cautious grace, as if protecting something fragile. She was lying. But why? He sat behind his grand mahogany desk, his fingers tapping impatiently against the polished wood. Her image replayed in his mind, her face pale, her hands trembling. If she was pregnant, and he was almost certain she was, then whose child was it? His? His chest tightened at the thought. No, it couldn't be. She had to be lying. Women always lied to get close to him, to get his money. She was no different, right? The intercom on his desk buzzed, breaking his thoughts. Mr. Grayson, your private investigator is here. Send him in. Alexander leaned back, his jaw tight. If Lena wouldn't give him the truth, he would find it another way. Moments later, a tall man with salt and pepper hair entered, his expression serious. You wanted me to look into someone? Alexander nodded, his eyes cold. Her name is Lena Johnson. Find out everything about her, where she lives, who she spends time with, where she works. I want to know every detail. The investigator's eyebrows lifted. You think she's a threat? Alexander's eyes darkened. I think she's hiding something, and I need to know exactly what it is. He wouldn't let her get away with this. Not this time. Lena stood at the edge of the playground, her eyes fixed on the laughing children. A soft smile crossed her lips as she felt the gentle flutter of kicks beneath her hand. Her child was growing stronger each day, a reminder of the love she had given and the betrayal she had endured. She was alone, but she was determined. She would protect this baby with everything she had. But her resolve wavered when she turned and saw him. Alexander stood at the entrance of the park, his posture rigid, his eyes locked on her. Her heart sank, her breath catching in her throat. How had he found her? Why was he here? Lena instinctively tightened her scarf around her growing belly, her pulse racing. But it was too late. The shock on Alexander's face was unmistakable, his eyes widening as he took in the curve of her stomach. His voice was low, strained. You lied to me. Lena's mouth went dry. She took a step back, her hands instinctively protecting her unborn child. I, I didn't, I just, she faltered, words failing her as his expression darkened. You told me you weren't pregnant, he continued, his voice trembling with anger. You made me believe. You made me doubt you. His eyes burned with hurt and fury, his fists clenched at his sides. Why? Why would you lie? Tears welled in Lena's eyes. Because you wouldn't have believed me. You didn't want to believe me. I tried to tell you, Alexander, but you called me a liar. You threw me out. His shoulders tensed, his jaw tightening. So you decided to hide my child from me? I didn't want to burden you. You made it clear that you didn't want us, Lena whispered, her voice cracking. I was protecting my baby from your rejection. Alexander's face softened, his anger giving way to anguish. He looked down at her stomach, his eyes haunted. I didn't know. I thought you were just another woman trying to trap me. I didn't know. His voice broke, his shoulders slumping. I didn't know you were telling the truth. Lena turned away, tears streaming down her face. Well, now you do, but it doesn't change anything. You said you didn't want us, and I believed you. So leave us alone. She walked away, her shoulders trembling, her heart breaking all over again. But Alexander didn't move. He stood rooted in place, his eyes glued to her retreating figure, his heart heavy with regret. He had lost them both before he even knew what he had. Alexander stood frozen, his mind spinning as Lena's words echoed in his head. You said you didn't want us, so leave us alone. Her voice had been strong, but he had seen the pain in her eyes, the tears she tried to hide. She was hurting just as much as he was, if not more, and it was all his fault. He watched her walk away, her steps hurried, her shoulders tense as she fought to maintain her composure. His chest tightened painfully, his fists clenching at his sides. He had been so blind, so stupid. He had hurt her, pushed her away when she needed him the most. And in doing so, he had abandoned his child. His child. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut, his breath catching as he stared at her retreating figure. That child growing inside her was his flesh and blood, his son or daughter. He had denied them, rejected them before they even had a chance to live. His eyes moved to her stomach, just before she disappeared around the corner. He had seen the way she instinctively cradled her belly, protecting their child with everything she had. A fierce sense of protectiveness surged through him, his heart pounding as he realized the gravity of his mistake. No, he whispered, his voice cracking. I won't lose them. Without another thought, Alexander ran after her, his long strides quickly closing the distance. Lena, wait, he called, his voice echoing across the park. But she didn't stop. If anything, she moved faster, her hand still protectively guarded her belly as she tried to escape him. Lena, please, Alexander shouted, his desperation palpable. I was wrong. I made a mistake. She stopped abruptly, her shoulders shaking as she stood with her back to him. For a moment, neither of them moved, the silence stretching painfully between them. Then, slowly, Lena turned around, her face tear-streaked, her eyes filled with anger and hurt. A mistake? She echoed, her voice trembling. You call abandoning your own child a mistake? Alexander flinched, guilt crashing over him like a tidal wave. I didn't know, he choked out, his eyes pleading. I didn't understand. I was scared. I've been lied to so many times, used by so many people. I thought you were like them. I thought you were trying to trap me. Lena's eyes flashed with pain. Trap you? She repeated, her voice breaking. You think I wanted this? To raise a child alone? To struggle every day, wondering how I'm going to provide for them? You think I wanted to be abandoned and humiliated by the father of my child? No, Alexander exclaimed, his voice raw with emotion. No, Lena, I never wanted that for you. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did, Lena whispered, her shoulders slumping as her anger gave way to exhaustion. You hurt me more than anyone ever has. I loved you, Alexander. I trusted you, and you threw me away like I was nothing. Her voice cracked, her tears falling freely now. You broke me. Alexander's heart shattered as he watched her cry, his own eyes stinging with tears. He had never meant to hurt her, never meant to push her away. But his own fears and insecurities had blinded him, had made him lash out at the one woman who had truly loved him. He took a step closer, his hands trembling as he reached out to her. "Lena, I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I was scared, and I let my fears control me. But I see it now. I see the truth, and I want to make it right. Please give me a chance to make it right." Lena looked up at him, her eyes filled with a pain so deep it nearly brought him to his knees. "You can't make it right, Alexander. You can't undo the damage you've done. You can't take back the words you said, the way you looked at me like I was trash. You can't change the fact that you abandoned us." Alexander's throat tightened, his vision blurring as tears filled his eyes. "You're right," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I can't change the past, but I can change the future. I can be there for you, for our child. I can be the father they deserve, the man you need. Please, Lena, let me try." Lena's lip trembled, her eyes searching his face, looking for any sign of deception. "How can I trust you? How do I know you won't hurt me again?" Alexander's shoulders sagged, his heart breaking at the fear and pain in her eyes. "I don't deserve your trust. I know that, but I'm willing to spend the rest of my life earning it. I'll do whatever it takes, Lena. I swear. Just, please, don't shut me out. Don't take my child away from me." Lena looked down, her hand instinctively cradling her belly once more. "You hurt me, Alexander. You hurt me so much. But our child deserves to know their father. They deserve to be loved by both of us." Her voice wavered, her eyes filled with conflict. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, but for them, I'm willing to try." Hope surged through Alexander, his heart pounding as he stepped closer, his voice trembling. "I'll do whatever it takes. I'll be there for every moment, every heartbeat. I won't abandon you again. I promise." Lena looked up at him, her eyes still filled with doubt, but softened by hope. "Then prove it. Show me that you mean it. Be there for me, for us." Alexander swallowed hard, his eyes shining with tears as he nodded. "I will. I swear I will." And for the first time in his life, Alexander Grayson knew exactly what he wanted. A family, with Lena and their child. He would fight for them, no matter what it took. And he would never let them go again.